There is an object at the center of the Old Testament that no one was allowed to touch. A chest of wood and gold, no bigger than a small trunk. Armies marched behind it. A river split in half in front of it. The walls of a city fell down at the sound of it. A pagan god was found smashed on the floor before it, and a man who reached out his hand to steady it one afternoon as it began to slip fell down dead the instant his fingers touched the gold. Kings longed for it. Enemies feared it. A whole nation carried it through the wilderness for 40 years. And then, one day, it simply vanished from history. And to this hour, no one on earth knows where it is. You already know its name, even if you have only ever met it in the movies. The Ark of the Covenant. But the real thing is stranger and holier and far more important than any treasure hunt. Forget the film for the next 20 minutes, because you are about to see what it truly was, what it held, everywhere it went, and why it mattered so much that heaven itself seemed to rest on top of it. And it begins not with a hero, but with a mountain, a cloud, and a set of instructions. Sinai. The desert. A people newly freed from slavery, camped at the foot of a burning mountain. Moses climbs up into the cloud, and God gives him a blueprint. Not for a weapon, not for a palace, for a box. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, God says, roughly the size of a large chest, about 4 feet long, small enough for men to carry on their shoulders. But every inch of it is chosen with care. Acacia wood at its heart, a hard desert wood, dense and slow to rot. And then gold. Pure gold, God says. Overlay it inside and outside, inside and outside, even the surfaces no human eye would ever see. Because this was not made to be admired. It was made to be holy, all the way through. A rim of gold ran around the top like a crown, and at the 4 corners, 4 rings of gold were cast. Through those rings ran 2 long poles of acacia wood, also overlaid in gold. And here is a small detail that tells you everything. The poles were never to be removed. They shall remain in the rings of the ark, God says. They shall not be taken from it. Do you see why? So that no hand would ever need to touch the ark itself. You carried it by the poles. You lifted it by the poles. You never laid a finger on the gold. It was holy. And holiness, in the Bible, is not something you handle casually. But the most important part was not the box at all. It was the lid. A slab of solid, pure gold laid across the top. It had a name of its own. In Hebrew, the kapparet. In English, the mercy seat. The place of covering. The place of atonement. The place where mercy was made. And rising up out of that golden lid, hammered from the same single piece of gold, were 2 figures. 2 cherubim. Not the plump babies of later paintings, but towering, all-filled guardians of heaven. They stood at either end of the lid, facing one another. Their wings stretched up and forward, arching over the center until the tips almost met. And their faces looked down, toward the empty space between them. Empty space. That was the whole point. Because God said something about that space that changes everything. There I will meet with you, he told Moses. From above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, I will speak with you. Think about what that means. The cherubim were not decoration. They were a throne. Their outstretched wings formed the seat. The lid was the footstool. And the God of all heaven chose to lower his presence down into that gap of empty air above the gold. All through the Bible, the phrase comes back again and again. The Lord of hosts, enthroned between the cherubim. This little box, in a tent, in a desert, became the throne of God on earth. Not because gold is powerful. Gold is just gold. But because the living God chose to say, here. This is where I will meet my people. And that raises the next question. What was kept inside it? Open the lid, and at first, there seems to be almost nothing. 2 slabs of stone. The tablets of the covenant. The 10 words that God himself had given at the mountain. That is why it is called the Ark of the Covenant. It carried the terms of the relationship between God and his people. A covenant is a bond, a promise, a marriage of sorts between heaven and a nation. And the Ark held the papers. But the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament tells us 2 more things were kept there too. A golden jar of manna. Manna was the strange bread from heaven that had fallen every morning in the wilderness and kept a whole nation alive. A jar of it was set beside the covenant, so no one would ever forget how God had fed them out of nothing. And the second thing was a wooden staff, Aaron's staff. A dead, dry walking stick that had once, overnight, sprouted buds and blossoms and ripe almonds. A sign of who God had chosen to lead. A dead branch made to live again. Bread that fell from the sky. A dead stick that bloomed. And the law of God, written in stone. Provision. Life out of death. And the covenant. All of it, kept in the dark, beneath the wings of gold. Now, a careful note here, because the Bible is honest with us. By the time of King Solomon, centuries later, we are told that only the 2 tablets of stone remained inside. The jar and the staff, first set before the ark in the wilderness, are not mentioned in the temple. Where they went, we are not told. The Bible simply lets the mystery stand. But at the center, always, were the tablets, the covenant. The Word of God, at the heart of everything. So that was the ark. Now watch where it goes. Because this box does not stay in the tent. When Israel finally leaves Sinai, the ark goes first. Out ahead of the whole nation, carried on the shoulders of the priests, leading them through the trackless wild. Wherever the ark went, the presence of God was understood to go. And so Israel followed. For 40 years it led them, until at last they came to the very edge of the promised land. And in front of them lay a barrier. The Jordan River, swollen and flooding its banks. No bridge, no boats, a whole nation and an impossible river. And God gives an instruction that sounds like madness. The priests are to pick up the ark, walk to the water's edge, and step in first. Not wait for the river to part. Step into the flood while it is still flooding. And so they do. They lift the ark, they walk down the bank, and their feet touch the water. And the moment the soles of their feet are wet, the river stops. Far upstream, the waters pile up in a heap, standing like a wall, and the riverbed below drains dry. The priests carry the ark to the middle of the empty riverbed, and there they stand, holding the throne of God on their shoulders, in the heart of a river that is holding its breath. And all Israel passes across, on dry ground, right past the ark. Only when every last person is safely over do the priests carry the ark up the far bank. And the instant their feet leave the riverbed, the waters crash back down and the Jordan runs again. They are in the promised land, and the ark led them in. But the land is not empty. In their path stands a fortress, Jericho. High walls, sealed gates, and no way through. And once again, the plan makes no military sense at all. No siege, no battering rams, just a march. Once a day, for 6 days, Israel is to walk around the city in silence. 7 priests go ahead, blowing 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And behind them, at the center of the procession, comes the ark. 6 days. 6 silent circles around the walls, and Jericho watches and waits and wonders. Then on the 7th day, they circle not once, but 7 times. And at the 7th circle, the trumpets sound the long blast, and the whole nation gets a great shout, and the walls of Jericho fall down flat. No ram touched them. No fire, no ladder. Just the presence of God carried around a city and a shout. The ark was not a magic weapon. It never fired a shot. It was a throne, and where the king goes, the impossible bows. But that lesson is exactly the one Israel would soon forget. Years pass, generations, and Israel drifts from God. And in a bitter battle against the Philistines, their fierce enemies on the coast, Israel is losing badly. So they have an idea, a terrible idea. Go and fetch the ark, carry it into battle. Then God will have to give us the victory. Do you hear what has happened? They have stopped trusting God and started trusting the box. They treat the ark like a lucky charm, a machine that must produce a result. And so they carry it out to the battlefield, and Israel roars, and the earth shakes with their shouting, and they lose anyway, catastrophically. 30,000 men fall. The 2 corrupt priests guarding the ark are killed, and the unthinkable happens. The Ark of the Covenant is captured and carried off by the Philistines. When the news reaches home, an old priest falls back and dies. A child is born and named, "The Glory has departed." It looked for all the world like the God of Israel had lost. But God does not need Israel's army to defend his own honor. The Philistines carry the ark home in triumph into the temple of their god Dagon. They set it down beside their idol, like a war trophy at the feet of the winner. And they lock the doors and go home for the night. In the morning, the priests come back and open the temple. And there is Dagon, their great god, fallen face down on the floor, bowed before the ark. They laugh it off. An accident. They stand the idol back up and go home again. The next morning, they open the doors once more, and Dagon is on the floor again. But this time, his head is broken off, and both his hands, snapped off, lie on the threshold. A headless, handless stump. A god with nothing left to think with, and nothing left to strike with. The message could not be clearer. There is only one true God, and every idol falls before him. And then a plague sweeps through the Philistine cities. Painful tumors break out among the people. Wherever they move the ark, the suffering follows. City after city begs to be rid of it. For 7 months, the ark stays in enemy country, and for 7 months, the enemy is tormented. Finally, they give up. Send it back, their leaders say. Send it back to Israel before it destroys us all. They load it onto a new cart, pulled by 2 cows, with a chest of golden gifts beside it, an offering of guilt. And they let the cows go, with no driver, to see which way they will turn. And the cows walk straight, without stopping, without wandering, all the way to the border of Israel, lowing as they go. The ark had gone into enemy hands as a prisoner. It came home as a conqueror, on its own terms. It comes at last to rest in a quiet town called Kiriath Jearim, in a private house on a hill, and there, strangely, it stays. For 20 long years, almost forgotten while Israel gets on with its troubled history, until a young shepherd becomes a king, a man after God's own heart, David. And David has a longing. He cannot bear that the throne of God sits ignored in a back room. He wants to bring the ark home, to his new capital, to the heart of the nation, to Jerusalem. And so a great procession sets out. Thousands of people. Music, singing, dancing, celebration. And the ark is placed on a new cart, and the oxen begin to pull, and the whole nation rejoices. But something is wrong. A small thing. An old, forgotten command. The ark was never meant to travel on a cart. It was meant to be carried on the shoulders of the priests by its poles. The Philistines used a cart because they did not know better. Israel had no such excuse. And on the road, the oxen stumble, and the cart lurches, and the ark begins to tip. A man named Uzzah is walking beside it. And in a single instant, without thinking, he does the most natural thing in the world. He reaches out his hand to steady it, to stop the holy throne of God from falling in the dirt. And the moment his fingers touch the gold, he falls down dead beside the ark. And the music stops, and the dancing stops, and a terrible silence falls over the whole procession. It feels so unfair, doesn't it? He was only trying to help. But sit with it for a moment, because it is teaching us something we have almost lost. Uzzah had grown so used to the ark that he forgot what it was. He reached to steady the throne of the holy God as if it were a piece of furniture, as if his hand were cleaner than the dust. The whole procession had turned the presence of God into a parade float, and they had stopped trembling. Holiness is not safe. It is not tame. It is not ours to manage and handle as we please. David is frightened and angry and grieved all at once. He does not dare take the ark another step, so he leaves it at the house of a man nearby and goes home shaken. And for 3 months, that household lives with the ark, and instead of death, blessing pours out on them. Every part of their life flourishes, because the ark was never a curse. It was the presence of God, dangerous to the careless, but life itself to those who honored it. And so David tries again, but this time he does it right. This time the priests carry the ark on their shoulders, by the poles, the way it was always meant to be. And at every few steps they stop and worship, reverence and joy held together. And David, the king, throws off his royal dignity and dances before the ark with all his might, a king, leaping and spinning in the street in front of the throne of a greater king. And with shouting and trumpets and unstoppable joy, the ark comes home to Jerusalem at last. David longed to build it a permanent house, but that honor would fall to his son, Solomon, the king who built the great temple, the most beautiful building in the ancient world. And at the very heart of that temple was a room, a perfect cube of cedar and gold, the most holy place. No windows, no decoration for its own sake, a room made for one thing and one thing only. And on the day the temple was finished, the priests carried the ark into that inner room, and they set it down beneath the wings of 2 vast golden cherubim, and they backed away, and they withdrew. And a cloud filled the temple, the glory of the Lord, so thick, so heavy, that the priests could not even stand to serve. Heaven had come down. The journey was over. The ark had come to rest at the center of the promised land, in the house of God. This was the summit, the highest, holiest moment, everything the ark had traveled toward. And then, something strange happens in the story. The ark goes quiet. Kings rise and fall. The nation splits and struggles. Prophets come and go. And the ark is barely mentioned again. It sits in the dark of the most holy place, and the Bible turns its attention elsewhere, until, centuries later, the great catastrophe comes. The armies of Babylon break through the walls of Jerusalem and burn the temple to the ground. And they carry off everything of value. The Bible lists the treasures they looted, item by item. The pillars, the basins, the bowls, the gold. But there is one name missing from that list. The one treasure it does not mention being taken. The Ark of the Covenant. And when the exiles finally return, decades later, and build a second temple, the most holy place is empty. The room is still there. But at its heart, where the throne of God once stood, there is only silence and bare floor. The ark is gone. And here is the honest truth. No one knows where. Was it burned with the temple? Melted down by the Babylonians for its gold? Hidden away by faithful priests before the city fell? There are old traditions, and you should hear them for what they are. One says the prophet Jeremiah hid it in a secret cave on a mountain, sealed until God's own time. Another, told for centuries in Ethiopia, claims it was carried far south and is guarded there still. These are legends, cherished by some, but written long after, and none of them can be proven. And whatever you have seen in the movies, with the melting faces and the government warehouse, that is a story, and only a story. The truth is quieter and stranger. The most sacred object in the world simply slipped out of history, and it was never seen again. And maybe that emptiness is the last thing the Ark has to teach us, because we were never meant to worship the box. Israel's great temptation, again and again, was to treat the Ark as the thing itself, a charm, a trophy, a god of gold. But the Ark was only ever a meeting place. A throne is nothing without the king who sits on it, and that is why its lid mattered most of all, the mercy seat. Once a year, on the holiest day, blood was carried into that dark room and sprinkled on the gold above the broken law. The tablets underneath were a record of a covenant that people had broken again and again, and over that broken law, God placed a seat of mercy, covered and forgiven and clean. That was the deepest secret of the Ark. It was not a place of judgment, it was a place of mercy. And the whole story of the Bible was moving toward the day when God would no longer live in a box, in a tent, in a room, when His presence would walk among us and meet us, not from between two golden cherubim, but face to face. So perhaps it is fitting that the Ark disappeared. Its work was done. It had carried the covenant through the wilderness. It had led a people home. It had shown a stubborn world over and over that the God of heaven is holy and near and not to be trifled with. And when the time came, it slipped quietly off the stage and left the room empty and pointed past itself to something greater. So the next time you picture the Ark of the Covenant, do not think first of the gold or the mystery or the adventure. Think of what it was made to hold, not treasure, not weapons, a covenant and a mercy seat, and the presence of a holy God who chose to dwell with His people. The box is lost. But the one who sat above it was never in the gold to begin with, and He has never gone missing at all.